Hello, welcome back to Aetheral Space 13.76, The Dark Side of the Moon. We are back.
This guy thinks he's Pink Floyd just because he's British. Isn't that fucked up?
Call me Red Floyd, because I'm covered in blood.
Are you now? Is that so?
I'm so brutal.
Is that so?
Yeah.
I don't believe that for even 2 seconds.
If you saw me, you would gasp because there's so much blood on me.
Kills you. Alright, you ready?
Sorry, I've got so much blood on me it hardened, now I can't be killed.
Shut up. Alright, we doing this?
Yes, I'm like Siegfried.
Who?
From mythology, fool.
Say the name again?
Siegfried? Siegfried?
Oh, the dragon guy. Yeah, I know.
Only the one spot that I didn't get covered in blood.
Morgan knocked fell backwards out of the sky. F.A.! But before his plummet became terminal, he whipped up a hand and latched a rope of fog onto the underside of the crystal platform. His fall became a swing, his face resolute as he rode the momentum and flipped up back onto the other side of the arena. That's a Jigglypuff-ass move, Morgan. For the briefest moment, he was right behind an unaware Acclima, and right behind the wall of this cursed cloud she'd suddenly erected. You forgot an apostrophe there.
Google forgot it, not me.
If he was going to get an opportunity, it wouldn't be much better than this. The broken sword was still in his hand. It wasn't so broken that it couldn't do the simplest job of a weapon. Morgan lunged forwards, and Acclima whirled around. The miasma moved with her, twisting around her form and engulfing Morgan's outstretched arm in a moment. Pain! It was as if Morgan had plunged the limb into hydrochloric acid. Screaming, he pulled his arm out of the smoke, his sword flying from his grasp as he did. The ruined weapon flew back, off the edge of the platform and out of sight. Morgan backed up as far as he dared, clutching his arm even as the pain slowly began to abandon it. As far as he could see, unlike with Curse Hand, this ability caused no lasting damage, just enough agony to stop attackers in their tracks. In exchange for rain, it lost its unrivaled damaging effects then? Unrivaled, sorry. This wasn't good. If Morgan received a full-body dose of this curse cloud, he doubted he'd have the wherewithal to dodge the Curse Hand that would surely follow. Getting hit by that was still a death sentence. Unless... No, he couldn't rely on that. He wasn't his teacher. He wasn't willing to die just to test something out. Did you think it'd be easy? Acclima growled, glaring at him through the smog. Poor little Acclima. We'll just take her spot and save her from scary Dragon Hadrian? Is that what you were thinking? Sweat poured down Morgan's forehead as he cracked the fingers of his recovered arm. Sorry, Acclima, he replied, a lopsided smile on his face. Even with you like this, I don't see you beating Hadrian. Not in a million years. This is a mercy. Her eye twitched. Gotcha. Acclima snarled as she charged forward, both hands gripping her cleaver sword as she raised it above her head. Curse Hand had been forgotten. At this moment, there was nothing the form of Supreme Air wanted more than to smash that blade through Morgan's body. It was just a pity, crack, that she'd miscalculated. Morgan Noct was a swordsman, and among swordsmen there was one ironclad rule. You could swing your sword however you wanted. You could weave and block however you pleased. However, under no circumstances did you ever drop your sword. So Morgan hadn't. Instead, he'd thrown it, and as it had fallen beneath the platform, strings of fog had connected it to the underside of the crystal disc. It had hung there for a moment, swaying back and forth like a disturbed chandelier. That wasn't the end of it, though. Blocks, their size and weight increased by amplification, attached to the dangling hilt of the further fog. The resemblance to a chandelier had grown more prominent by the second. The purpose of this strange construction, however, was something entirely different. Crack! There was an anchor. Acclima lost her footing as the platform collapsed beneath her, stumbling as an entire section broke away and fell into the night. It was like a pizza with a single slice snatched away. Her eyes widened with alarm as she saw the drop into the void right next to her feet, and she went to move to safer ground. But the opening had already been created. Morgan rushed in. His sword wasn't in his hand, so he could not stab or slash the girl. He couldn't attack her with punches or kicks either. He would only get this one chance to make a second's worth of contact with her, apostrophe on seconds. Not long enough for any complicated maneuvers. As such, there was only one weapon available to him. The drop. Aether could only do so much. There were very few people who could survive a drop from this kind of height, especially when they had no movement abilities. Morgan had seen Acclima's infusion, and he knew she was not one of those people. It would take just a second, a shove, a push. Her footing was already all but gone. If he just pushed her, this would be over. It was only human to push. The battle would be won. The threat to Musazi's ascendance would be removed. Gregory had been right about that, if nothing else. If Morgan didn't act now, he'd lose his chance. The threat to Musazi would still exist. Everything, all of this, would be for nothing. Push her, Morgan urged himself. Push her! You've already betrayed her. You've already stolen her birthright. You've already attacked her. Now push her. Push her. It's only natural to push her. I knew you would do it. I'm so glad you did it. It's only natural to push. Morgan's hand reached out. Mr. Noct? Aklima looked up, hands tied around a clumsy sword. Am I holding this right? And stopped in midair. Aklima's hand did not stop. Regaining her balance, she lunged forward, seizing hold of Morgan's face and screaming, Curse hand! 1 second passed, 2, 3, but Morgan did not fall. Morgan did not bleed. Morgan didn't so much as twitch. He just stood there, Aklima's hand on his face, his eyes closed. Nothing had happened. Aklima's hand trembled against Morgan's face. Huh? K. Morgan quietly replied, his eyes still closed. It stands for kindred. I wasn't sure how your ability worked, so I didn't know for sure if this would work. But I guess it does. While I'm using this, while I'm touching the target, I register as that person to their aether. You can't use Curse Hand on yourself, right? Aklima's face twisted. This ability, this was designed to be used against me, wasn't it? Morgan clenched his fist. Yes. So, you were never on my side. Morgan opened his eyes, but he still couldn't meet hers. Sorry. His fist, bolstered by the infusion of aether, struck Aklima in the side of the head. There was the shortest, loudest yelp from her. And then she'd fallen, crumpled into a pile at Morgan's feet. Unconscious, not dead. But Morgan felt like shit all the same. God damn it, he muttered. Dying, Aenir Yggdrasil found, was something of an involved process. Gretchen Hale had been working on the problem for several minutes, pressing that blowtorch device against its body, driving it deeper and deeper as the flames bore a hole through its final form's chest. Is this like The Boys?
Well, Aenir, we had a talk.
It supposed this device was another aether armament, probably designed to work against it specifically. It seemed this was a method akin to the one used by Azez Tazir, burning the consciousness away, leaving an empty shell. Who's Azez? Is this the Azez?
Yeah.
So he did have a last name.
Yeah.
What was Cadman's then?
He didn't have one.
Fuck off.
He didn't have one. What do you want me to say?
Does Aklima not have one?
No.
I feel like, especially in a world where there's trillions and trillions of people, only having one name is insane work. How do you ever? Was this fate something Aenir Yggdrasil could escape? It didn't seem likely. Because of the Spear of Stillness, it couldn't move at all. It couldn't even grow. It half felt like a corpse already. But was that really the case? Could it really not grow at all? Could it really not move at all? The Spear of Stillness was a powerful artifact, to be sure. Aenir Yggdrasil could feel it weighing down on its consciousness, a constant pursuer that blocked off all the necessary impulses for shape-shifting. However, it was not the movable thing. If it mustered all of its effort, focused all of its will, could it not break through, even just for a moment? What could it do with such a moment, though? Gretchen Hale had undeniably been heavily wounded in their battle. Another good strike would most likely incapacitate her, but she would be able to react to any clumsy swing before it even landed. It would accomplish nothing but spite, and Aenir Yggdrasil put little value in that. If it were to do anything, it would need a distraction. A conversation? No, Gretchen Hale had already decided to kill it, and Aenir Yggdrasil was not attempting to taunt. I love that he cares about himself that much. He respects himself.
He's got self-care.
A bluff by flaring its aether? No, Gretchen Hale was the analytical kind. She already knew what it could do and saw no reason to worry. Could it stall? Could it stall until Morgan Noct returned? No. It could feel it already, the fire burning away at its sense of self. It would not last long enough for Morgan Noct to return. There was a very good chance that these were its last moments. It cast its attention around, seeking to understand the site of its death completely. When it found something small and spherical rolling across the floor, something bright and blue. The crystal ball, not the one Gretchen Hale had used to see the future, but the one she'd used to capture Morgan Noct and Aklima. Little Pearl, she had called it. Why had it reappeared? It had not been present during the fight itself. Aenir Yggdrasil was sure of it. Had Gretchen Hale recalled it now that victory was assured? It rolled to a halt at Gretchen Hale's feet, but she took no notice of it. She just continued to press the torch into the wooden carcass before her, her eyes cold and dull. It seemed that, for her, this had already transitioned from a killing to a labor. She was working on Aenir Yggdrasil like he was one of her aether armaments. But sound was coming from the sphere, muffled, distant, but definitely there. Words so indistinct their meaning couldn't be made out, the faraway scuffle of a violent confrontation. But those voices, Aenir Yggdrasil recognized them. Morgan Noct and Aklima. It could hear their fight. Whether the crystal ball had sent them the sound from that location was being piped... What?
Pipes.
Wherever the crystal ball had sent them, I see. The sound from that location was being piped right back through the armament. Presumably, that was how Gretchen Hale was going to keep an eye on the course of things over there. If Aenir Yggdrasil understood the situation correctly, Aklaima was no doubt an important investment for her. Still, even if that had appeared, there was nothing more Aenir Yggdrasil could do. It was going to... Aklaima screamed. Immediately Gretchen Hale moved, and immediately Aenir Yggdrasil moved. It might have been the shadow of concern. Gretchen Hale's eyes widened as she whipped her head around to look at the sphere. Her mouth opened to shout something. It was the echo of a fighting spirit. With the last of its strength, Aenir Yggdrasil grew its vines to form an arm and slammed it into Gretchen Hale's head. A wordless roar rumbled over the rooftop. With all the damage Gretchen Hale had already taken, the effect was immediate. Her eyes rolled up in their sockets as she flew across the roof, landing in an undignified heap. She remained still on the ground as the rain pummeled her body, but Aenir Yggdrasil doubted she was dead. She hadn't been that weak, and it hadn't been that strong. Not that wise, it seemed. In the end, all it had accomplished had indeed been spite. Even though Gretchen Hale had been rendered unconscious, she was still victorious. Even though she had been sent flying, the glass spear was still embedded in Aenir Yggdrasil's chest. She'd driven it in deep enough that it was still staying put without her. The fire was still burning. Perhaps this was the kind of punishment that came from breaking a promise. It was strange. Aenir Yggdrasil didn't feel particularly bad about this. It had always feared dying, of course, as any living creature did, but as it was guaranteed now, that fear no longer held a purpose. If anything, there was the slightest sensation of regret. It would not be able to see how the world played out. Whether Morgan Noct achieved his happiness, whether Atoy Muzazi achieved his happiness, whether everything they had done would even mean something in the end. But most of all, the dreams of its fellows. The last memories of the fell beasts, the legacy of the woods that it had absorbed into its wisdom. It had hoped to bring those thoughts and feelings back into the world, to resurrect its brethren and give their kind another chance. It had promised. When had it intended to carry it out? One day, ever distant. Now there were no more days. Now there were no more minutes. So, had it betrayed that promise as well? That thought alone provoked feelings of regret. No. It extended a shaking vine, stretching across to its companion on this lonely rooftop. There is still a way. Wisdom crackled. Wait, how is he stretching without his shape-shifting? Dan?
1 sec, sorry.
Oh no, plot hole. It's over, Etherheads.
We broke through. We broke through for a moment. It's got like a little shaky movement.
Is he putting himself inside of her like he did with Morgan?
Why would I tell you?
Well, I mean, I can already figure that out. But it's crazy that he can still move. Spears of Stillness are fucking washed. This shit wouldn't work on any
It's like 1,000
tyrant.
years old.
Yeah, sure. So-called blind man.
It demonstrably did. There's no more of them.
The light washed over Morgan once again, and the moment it cleared, his arms fell limp at his sides. It didn't take a genius to see what had happened. Atop the shattered rubble of the rooftop stood a scarecrow. A burnt, smoldering scarecrow. Smoke rose up from the charred ruin. Drooping vines crumbled into ash. As Morgan watched, the square face on the tree's face cracked and crumbled into nothing. Aenir Yggdrasil was dead. Morgan stepped over Aklaima's unconscious body, his breath boiling in his throat. Strangely enough, his skin felt cold as ice. His hand twitched, reaching for a sword that was no longer there. It had broken, after all. Plus, it had probably fallen off after the platform disappeared. Maybe it was still falling. Would it end up landing on someone? Was that something he had to worry about? Somehow he couldn't muster the effort. Morgan stopped. Someone else was lying on the ground in front of him. Another unconscious body, a small, pungent woman with red hair. She was meant to be dead, but Morgan wasn't surprised to see her here. She'd been sending assassins after Muzazi for ages, after all. This time she'd shown up personally. Gretchen Hale. Morgan had no sword, but you didn't need a sword to crush a throat. He was as calm as could be. He kneeled down on the ground beside the unconscious girl, clasped his hand around her neck, and began to squeeze. Danger! He leapt backwards, swinging his arm and blocking a strike of paper aimed right for the unconscious Aklaima's throat. It wasn't a perfect block. The blade left a deep gash in Morgan's arm, blood pouring down to the floor as he stood protectively in front of Aklaima. For the time being, vengeance was put on hold. This mission wasn't over yet, after all. As long as the mission wasn't over, his will had a lifeline. Gregory Hazard clicked his tongue as he landed a short distance away, unfolding his bloodied blade arm. "Are you stupid?" Morgan growled. "I told you to stop!" "It's like I said before," Gregory glared back. "It'll solve the problem." "This was your last chance!" Gregory smirked. "You think you can stop me?" Could he, in his current condition? Morgan couldn't say for sure. Gregory hadn't escaped unscathed from his battle either. There were strange, thin cuts covering the entire right side of his body, but he was walking and talking like nothing had happened. The odds might not have been in Morgan's favor. Oh well. For people like them, there was only one way to test those odds. Morgan took a step forward. Gregory took a step forward. And both stopped. Their attention had been seized by something else, after all. Something was coming for them. A great wall of darkness was spilling out from between the buildings of the city, rushing forward like an inky tsunami, like the light cast from a black sun. It was engulfing everything! No light survived. Morgan went to dodge, Gregory went to dodge, but neither were fast enough, and the shadows swallowed everything, living or dead. Ooh, Nyan. Is that him?
What would I tell you?
Why do you hate me? Are you just a hater now? Is that your identity?
I've always
bad identity. Shaking my head.
You seriously have a bad identity? How dare you?
I'd kill you. Give me a second.
Because of my identity?
Yeah.
Wow.
Aetheral questions. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. JTKC asks, which arc went closest to the original plan, and which arc had the most changes?
Closest to the original plan, probably Arc 6, to be honest. Because that's a very much smaller scale one, though. And you can say I wrote that very quickly.
Yeah. It was still really good.
I locked in for that one.
It was so good. Which one went the furthest from your original plans?
Furthest from my original plan? I would probably say either Arc 7 or Arc 9.
Interesting. I'm very curious to hear about 9 at some point.
Because those were very much like big battle royale types of stories.
Okay.
And
I'm glad you didn't, because you already did battle royale two times.
They are those at the moment already.
Oh yeah, you did it twice, which I thought was very funny.
Those are the 2 times I did them.
And both times the point system did not matter at all. Which I couldn't tell if that was meant to be a commentary or if you just, like, didn't give a swag.
Okay, well, in Elation Fields, of course, the point system doesn't matter.
But what about the money?
Fuel to make people go crazy talk.
The funniest part about the money bounties is you forgot your own system was, like, more like yen than dollars, so it's a comically small amount of money, and you have not fixed it. It is like $100 to kill someone. It's like nothing. And everyone's like, ooh, finally our score. We'll be able to buy a nice meal. Titania asks, what is exactly needed for a natural Aether armament to be created? If it's just time invested, does it sort of scale over time, or is it all at once?
It would sort of scale. So the more you infused it, the more it would sort of retain that infusion when it's got that little trigger. But the more you've infused it, like if you don't, there's a difference in the level of strength between one that's happened with for years and one that's happened for like months.
Mm-hmm. Would Dragon's old gun be a minor?
It probably wouldn't, to be honest. He has.
Okay.
It's never specified, but he does not keep the same weapon. He does not give a shit about that thing.
Right. That makes sense.
Whereas Marcus's pistol, even if he died, that would be a pretty good Aether armament.
Ooh, that's kind of cool. And they also ask, when it comes to creating Aether armaments on purpose, is it similar to creating a technique but harder, or vastly different? Would it be easier to create ones close to abilities you already have?
It's a different skill set, but it's a similar sort of process. It's adjacent, I would say. Because we see that Gretchen can sort of like emulate other people's abilities through Aether armaments, like what she did with Westmore.
You know what I'm kind of imagining, Informed by Cradle, is almost like soulsmithing in a way?
Yeah.
Where it's like you have to invent a technique first and then embed it into the object and give it like the right shell.
So she needs to understand how the technique works so she can make the Aether armament do it. Yeah.
Because if you think about it that way, with all the things she's made, she's actually created a ton of techniques.
Yeah.
She's like the Wu Ming of soulsmithing, or not soulsmithing, Aether armamenting.
Like,
is there a word for being an Aether armament maker?
I think it's just like an Aether Smith, maybe?
Aether Smith.
He's like
lastly,
Ramba 2, basically.
Lastly, MT2K1 asks, been meaning to ask this for a while, so here it is. Let's say that a gene tyrant is destroyed, save 2 cubes totaling 9 by 9 inches. If the cubes were somehow combined, would the mass somehow gain consciousness? If so, would it be a different consciousness or a new one?
it's dead by that point. So if you put them back together, it would not come back.
I assume because it would just be 2 lumps of dead biomass.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.